Lee is unable to join us this afternoon, so we will go ahead and kick it off, and we'll just give Lou a second to get the slides up so that we can all share this. Thank you, Lou. And I'll cover briefly the next slide, I think has the agenda on it. So we are going to give you an opportunity to meet Deloitte. They have some really exciting information to share with you. We'll go over where we are in our obligations and expenditures work that we're doing to prepare for this next legislative session, and then talk about a request we got from Fiscal Research. So I want to make sure y'all are up to speed on that. And then if we have any remaining time, we will go into office hours. And for our Deloitte colleagues, you should know that these are our state agency partners. We meet on a regular basis about every 2 weeks, and they ask lots of great questions. So we usually just allow people to raise their hand virtually or just ask a question. And we're looking forward to a great conversation. So if Lou, you want to advance the next two, and then I'll introduce Joe. Are you going to, Joe G or Joe S, are you going to get us started?
Good afternoon, everybody. Joe S. and the rest of the Deloitte crew, happy to get the ball rolling here. It's great to join this call. Thank you so much for the invitation and looking forward to meeting and working with all of you. Just to start us off, we're going to run through a quick round of introductions. I'll introduce myself first. I hope you can all hear me, by the way, and my mic is clear. I'm Joe Gorsuch. I'm a member of this Deloitte team as one of our project managers supporting you all over the next several months and throughout the life cycle of this entire State Fiscal Recovery Fund program. I've been in the world of grants management now and also the government scene, supporting state and local governments with crisis relief funding, recovery funding, et cetera, for about the last 8 years. And again, look forward to working with you all. With that, I will pass the baton over to Joe Simon, who can introduce himself as well.
Hello, everyone. My name is Joe Simon. I work in grants management exclusively. I usually help states run compliance programs or subrecipient monitoring and other pass-through entity requirements. I've been in this field for a little over 10 years. A lot of experience with disaster recovery funding, but also for the last few years, almost exclusively with pandemic recovery funding. So happy to be here, happy to be working with you all.
Joe, would you like to pass the baton to Matt? We got Matt on.
Hey, good afternoon all. My name is Matt Mercer. I have also been doing federal and state grant programs for coming up on 8 years now, specializing in crisis-related and disaster-related grant programs for federal and state governments. So excited to be here and help you with your compliance issues to make sure that we can keep the money in North Carolina.
That's right. And with that, last but not least, if Linus, you are on, I will pass it over to you.
Appreciate the introduction and the chance to connect with you all. Linus O'Connor Jr. I've had the privilege, I think, of meeting some of you with our last engagement with NCPRO, but I'll be serving as the engagement partner. Again, our job is one of service, which is how do we provide you with the assistance that you need. We will be leveraging our subject matter expertise, as well as also leading practice insights from helping multiple jurisdictions, clients, and grants recipients navigate the risks and the opportunities that come with using federal and state grant funds. And so again, excited and honored by the trust that has been bestowed upon us, and looking forward to a fruitful partnership and helping make impact for your agencies, as well as also for the people of North Carolina.
Thank you so much, Linus and team, for the introduction. With that, I believe we can move on to the next slide. Great. So we prepared an agenda for you all today. We just went through the introductions. Next, we want to give you all a high-level overview of our compliance objectives and where we are planning to provide support. From there, we'll jump into our approach of how we're actually going to do that, right? How are we going to achieve those objectives in reaching compliance? From there, we'll jump into what will be our first ask of all of you, our state agency partners, and helping us evaluate that risk of non-compliance to help us find ways that we can help and support you throughout this the life cycle of this grant. And then we'll talk about a timeline for receiving that information and how you can get it to us. And then reserve some time for questions. All right, with that, let's jump right in. We already went through the slide, but if you can't see us on camera, this is what we look like. Great. So here are some just 5 high-level objectives that we're seeking to accomplish and exceed here with you all. The first is we're going to be monitoring the subrecipients of our partners at NCPRO. Next, we're going to be verifying that all of you as state agency partners are compliant with all applicable state, federal rules and regulations through various cyclical monitoring, which we'll get into here shortly and what that's going to look like. Next, we're going to confirm that state agencies and subrecipients are audited and monitored. We can talk about what that looks like from a single audit threshold, for example. And then bringing it back to why we're here, we really want to mitigate the risk of federal clawback resulting from any audits, right? Whether it's the federal Office of Inspector General or any other audit, we want to minimize risk. And why? It's because we do, like Matt said, want to keep the dollars here in North Carolina. Team, is there anything to add here before we move on? Great. All right, so let's jump into what is this approach going to look like? How are we going to achieve state agency compliance? As you can see here on the little virtual projector, first we'd like to meet with all of you one-on-one, right? In coming weeks to talk about what your experience has been, like with the State Fiscal Recovery Fund, set expectations around monitoring, which we can get into and answer questions about here later on, and then request and verify some information that we'll talk about here in the next slide to run a risk assessment to determine what those compliance gaps are so we can be very intentional about the support that we're providing. Next here is we're actually going to run a risk assessment based on these preliminary meetings and information that we're going to request. And we're going to try to make this risk assessment as data-driven as possible. Materiality and amount of award is really going to drive a large portion of this risk score and calibration. And then just like monitoring, our risk assessment is going to be cyclical. Jumping into monitoring, following these preliminary meetings and the results of a risk assessment, we're going to schedule time with you and your staff to walk through the policies, procedures, processes that you have to manage the funds. We may also be requesting financial and programmatic support, right, to verify what's being reported on and what's being kept, right, in case of an audit. And we're also going to be employing a monitoring approach that is, again, cyclical, so that we can follow up appropriately and timely to any areas of possible non-compliance or where there could be some risk. So what do we do based on that? Well, we're going to evaluate our findings, right? Following our review, our hope is that we can issue you a letter detailing our observations, objective observations that are made, coupled with appropriate federal guidance that's related to the finding, and some leading practices, right? Things that you can do to shore up areas of compliance and help fill those gaps. Last but not least, I think as it was mentioned at the top of this conversation, we're here to be a resource for all of you and support you and keep the money here in North Carolina. We're here to provide that industry expertise in providing you recommendations on how to improve areas of non-compliance and any observations that are issued to support you all at the state agency level. With that, I think we can move on to the next slide. So now I'm going to pass the baton over to Matt again, and he's going to run through what this first ask is going to look like from us. Matt?
Okay. Yes, so we were asking for just some basic documents from everyone, focusing around fiscal compliance and then some program specific information that we will need to complete a risk assessment. if you don't have any of this information, we are here to help you work through that and find a way to get to compliant. Not having this documentation doesn't necessarily mean that it's an automatic fail, but the more information we can have, the better we can assess how risky each agency is. So for the agencies that are doing really well, we're going to be pretty hands-off and let you keep doing what you're doing really well. And those that need some extra help, we are here to help you with that and get you back into being compliant, where then you don't need our help anymore, ultimately.
And Matt, let me just jump in here to say, for those of you who may not have remembered our CRF desk review, the reason that we're doing this now is because we kind of learned the hard way that we had to provide a lot of the information that's even being provided in this document request list to auditors, federal auditors, and we had like, a day or two to turn it around. So putting this information in place now, I think will help all of us when it comes time to going through those processes. Sorry, Matt, keep going.
No, it's all good. So, do we have any questions about documents being requested? And we will make sure everyone gets a copy of this list as well. Okay. So for this, we take your time to review the document request. If you have any questions, please reach out to your NCPRO grant manager point of contact, or one of us. We are happy to answer any questions you have. And then we do ask if it's possible to get this back to us within a little over 2 weeks so that we can conduct a risk assessment and then start moving forward with any monitoring as needed.
Thanks, Matt. That concludes our short but information-packed presentation. If we have some time.
You do have one question in the chat. Is there
Okay.
a template for these files that you have put together? Beyond the request list, I think, is there a template that you want? Is there like a format, I think is what Tori is asking, but Tori, feel free to jump in.
Yep.
It looks like somebody's just chimed in. The slides will be presented and documents request will be made available to all. So that answers my question. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. I see another question here coming in.
Yeah, Daryl, go ahead.
I'm going to ask this question, but it might be something that you reveal to us either one of two ways. You're either going to share with us in this session today what those documents are, or you're going to share with us what the documents to be requested are based on your meeting with each of us individually. Which is it?
So prior to meeting with all of you individually, we're requesting this list so we can get as much information as possible from you to try to understand your baseline processes, procedures, what documentation you do have to help us run a risk assessment. And then we can use a part of that preliminary meeting to answer any questions you may have about the document request list, or follow up on items that we're requesting.
As a follow-up to that, there was a series of documents that we submitted at the outset, more or less to delineate our practices and how we determine, at least in our particular case, and probably true of many of the other agencies within the state, in essence, vetting how we distribute monies and who receives monies. Those documents, do you have access to those, or are we starting from square one? I guess that's a question to both you and Stephanie.
We have access. And Lou, can you go back a couple of slides to that request list? Daryl, that is a great question. Yes, they do have access. So one, they have access to your MOUs and the documents that you put in your MOUs, which most of y'all will remember were attachments A and B. a budget and a plan for how we were going to do these programs. As you've also given us other documentation, and it varies by agency, we have put that into, we have that in folders that we're giving them access to as well. They're also going to have access to Pangram, so all of your monthly expense reports, the information you upload into Pangram, they'll have that too. I think some of these, which, like, let's take for example, like this turnover of key personnel. We don't keep that tracked in a way that we may need to keep it tracked. Like, we don't have org charts from you guys.
Mhm.
When you may have had turnover in a position, you'll usually ask us to take somebody out of Pangram and give somebody else access to Pangram, and we don't have that in a methodical kind of consistent order. So that's something that would be kind of a new ask, but they will start off with the documents that y'all have already given us.
Okay, so what we would receive then is probably other documents that may be needed if necessary. Otherwise, some assessment of our risk will be based on the documents as submitted previously.
Oh, Steve, that's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. Maybe Tommy does, or Joe.
Just
I
reading
can
the
chime
question.
in. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Tommy. Sorry.
I was gonna say, it is a good question, Steve, and we will not be looking at projects that are already closed out.
But I guess my question is, there were documents that were submitted, many of these that I see in the list, but as referenced by Stephanie, that are in our files. I guess my question is more specific to if there's any more documents other than those, we will receive a very specific request.
To that question. We believe, at least for the risk assessment, this is all encompassing for this initial request. Based on the type of monitoring that is conducted, we'll then be requesting different types of information. Again, it could be financial or programmatic and more in depth. But at least at the onset, we feel pretty comfortable with this list being reconciled with whatever you've submitted prior will be enough.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Great questions. Any more? Okay, well, hearing none, I want to thank the Deloitte team. I really appreciate your approach to this. We will send out the slides as always. I know Josh is on here and he sends them out. So we'll send out the slides and the recording too, so you can go back through it. And we will follow up to let you know, and answer any questions that you may have for as we get this documentation in. But I really appreciate it. I appreciate Deloitte's help. Oh, that's a good question too, Steve. The slide is a document request. Yes. And we will make sure you get it. We'll probably pull the slide out and put it in the main part of the email so you don't have to dig through it again. And also, we know there are some agencies that aren't on this call right now who couldn't make it today, so we'll follow up with them as well. But all great questions. We appreciate it. And glad y'all are asking, and we hope this will be a good collaborative process. I don't know how y'all feel about monitoring, but I don't ever love hearing about monitoring. But I do think that we're trying to make this a process that just continues the work that we've done together so that we make sure that we have everything that we need to have ready for when we will inevitably be audited. And we know that we'll be ready. And I think that's a great thing for all of us. So thanks again to our Deloitte partners. And we are going to move on to the next part of our meeting. All right, thanks. If you go to the next slide, Lou. So I'm sorry to be a repeat, record on repeat here, but we really need to continue to work through our obligations. Y'all know that these funds have to be obligated by December 31st, 2024. The obligation occurs at the state agency level, the prime recipient level, when an order is placed for property and services, and you enter into a contract to subaward or similar transactions that require payment. We know we have some problems with how U.S. Treasury is defining administrative costs right now. So what we're trying to do at this point, this is going to be a problem that we have to solve at the NCPRO level. We're not asking you to solve it at your level. All we need to know is if you think you're going to have administrative or, regular state agency expenditures that will take place in 2025 and 2026 for which you are not entering into a contract or a subaward for. And we know there are going to be some, and I think we're going to solve this, and I think Treasury is going to help us solve this. We just need to make sure we know what those dollar amounts are so that we're prepared. Since that's the one thing we're really waiting for with the obligation guidance to come out in final form. So any questions about that before we go to the next part? Okay, next slide. We know right now still that our obligation rules that we're working with will lock our agencies and your subrecipients into the reported projects regardless of the revenue replacement designation. So right now change orders are not accepted. And this upcoming short session will be our last opportunity to get any funds reappropriated if we think we cannot obligate them and or we cannot spend them by the federal deadlines. So we know that there's going to be 2 returns right now, according to the guidance we've gotten to Treasury. First, if we don't obligate the funds, we will be repaying any unobligated funds in January of 2025. And if we don't spend the money, we'll be returning those funds sometime in early 2027. So we are still working with Treasury. We are still working all the lobbying angles that we have, but we really need to know before this legislative session and for our purposes before the governor's budget, what funds we think may be at risk of not being able to be obligated or spent so that we can ask the legislature for a swap. We're not trying to undo any projects. We just are trying to make sure that if we have a project that's likely to go over, we can notify the legislature of that, see if there's any way we can swap that for general fund money so that we're making sure we're using all our dollars to their fullest extent. Next slide, please. We are working, our goal is March 7th to get this information together. You should have already had multiple, if not a single, contact from your grants manager and or meetings. I know we're having multiple discussions at multiple levels. Tommy and I are meeting with most of the agency designees who come over and meet with OSBM when they come for their ABC budget process. And then I know grants managers are meeting as well. If you have questions, because unfortunately not every state agency has the same appropriation, and these funds have been used for so many different things that there are some confusing questions, just ask us. We'll be happy to help you work through it. That's what your grants managers are here for. That's what we're here for. So if you're worried about it, you're not sure what it means in your particular case about obligation or expenditure, just let us know and we'll figure it out with you. This is just part of the process, and we want to be as ready as we can. We have already started getting questions from fiscal research if we're worried that we may not be able to obligate and spend everything. So we're again working on the OSBN side first, and then we will at some point notify fiscal research, but we're trying to get as firm of numbers as we can. And I know we're kind of asking you in some ways to predict the future with some of your subrecipients, and I know that's hard, and we're just going to work through those on a case-by-case basis. Unfortunately, just the way the guidance is, we're kind of stuck with this calendar that we have right now. So that's what our goal is. We really need to get this information to OSBM and the governor's office by mid-March and to report it to the General Assembly by May. Next slide, please. So any questions about expenditures and obligations and what we're trying to do there. Okay, and the other thing that has come up is that the General Assembly, the Fiscal Research Group, for GovOps has asked us about our use of State Fiscal Recovery Funds. So we have, of course, because we know Linus is here with Deloitte, we have been working on key performance indicators for quite some time. And we have about half of the agencies have gone through the full process, or half of the projects, not half of the agencies. So we have 140 projects. Agencies have multiple projects, as you well know. And we have half of them that have gone fully through the projects or process and started submitting their KPIs, and that is great. The challenge is Fiscal Research asked us in the last, well, since our last meeting, so in the last week, where our use of funds information is. So NCPRO is required to report quarterly on SFRF appropriations, disbursements, expenditures, and use of funds. And Fiscal Research is now requesting more detail on the use of funds. So we have bought ourselves a little bit more time. We are trying to launch our KPI dashboard by April of 2024, and we will report the data that we have to Fiscal Research at that time. So if you have not submitted your KPI development or KPIs, we need to get that process done, and we need you to go ahead and get that data completed. We're going to give Fiscal Research what we have in April. So if you don't have anything and you haven't worked through your KPIs, it's going to show up that you haven't done it yet. And I really don't want to put any agency in that position, but we're kind of to the point where we have to turn it in. So unfortunately, the information we turn into Treasury doesn't line up in the way that Fiscal Research wants it. So we definitely need you to work through your KPIs to get that stuff done and to let us know, again, through your grants manager, if you have any concerns, if you need any extra help, we will make ourselves available to help you. And I know it's a rough time with budget development, with monitoring, with NCFS challenges that we have, but we've got to get this done. I think Fiscal Research wants to make sure they have it in hand for members before the session starts. So that's where we are. Happy to answer questions if you have them. Yes, Greer.
Hey, Stephanie. I was just wondering, just to skip back to the projected expenditures, you mentioned the March 7th date for meetings to discuss obligations and the expenditures, but by what date do we actually need to submit our final projections to you?
I think I'm going to leave that up to your grants manager. We really would like to have all of them by mid-March, but I already know in talking with some of the agencies, if you have a lot of subrecipients, that can be very challenging. So we're trying to work through that on a case-by-case basis. But we really need to try to have those by March 7th, March 8th. And I might have put that in the slide the wrong way, but I meant, Lou, you can roll back a little bit, a few slides if you don't mind. But we really need to have those meetings completed. And yeah, it does say meeting. It's a few slides forward. We were trying to use the meetings to get the information. And I know that's not been quite as easy as we would like. So I know if you're working on it and you talk to your grants manager about it, we'll buy you as much time as we can. But the governor's budget is what we need it for, and so we really need mid-March we're gonna have to give OSBM something by mid-March. So we can give them a range, but we're gonna have to give them something. I hope that helps, Greer. All right. Any other questions? All right. Well, thanks, everybody. Feel free to stay. We will stay on for office hours to answer individual questions. And remember, you can always reach out to your grants manager and let us know if you need to work through specific issues. I know this is a tough time right now. We are asking you to do a lot, but I'm hopeful we are coming down the home stretch here and it'll start to get easier instead of harder. Thanks again for everything you do. We really, really appreciate it.